what if I told you that your brain literally cannot tell the difference between conversational Spanish, a textbook on quantum physics, and like a high-stakes game of chess?
Right. To your brain, they're all exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's wild. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at some research that, well, it completely flips how we think about learning.
It really does.
The premise here is that all those intimidating subjects we treat as, towering mountains of facts to memorize physics, macroeconomics, coding, they aren't mountains of facts at all.
No, not all.
They are simply languages.
Yep.
And mastering them doesn't require, like, a genius IQ. It just requires becoming fluent.
Which is, a massive paradigm shift. I mean, the conventional approach to education relies heavily on performance anxiety and rote memorization.
For sure, flashcards and stress.
Exactly. We drill formulas, we memorize vocabulary lists, we take these incredibly stressful exams. But the research we're digging into today suggests that this entire method is a neurological mismatch. We actually evolved for context-first learning.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the core idea that just blew my mind is that if you grow up in an environment where people naturally use a rich, diverse vocabulary in everyday conversation, you naturally develop this mental scaffolding.
Right.
You end up absorbing incredibly complex concepts without really trying. You grasp the underlying idea, like the vibe of the concept, instead of just memorizing a dictionary definition.
You're absorbing the context.
Yeah. It instantly made me think of that sci-fi movie, Arrival. You know, the one where Amy Adams plays a linguist trying to communicate with aliens?
Oh, absolutely. I love that movie. The narrative really hinges on the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
Wait, the what hypothesis?
Sapir-Whorf. It's the idea that the language you speak literally shapes your actual reality. So by learning the alien language, she begins to perceive time non-linearly.
Right. Obviously, the movie takes it to a crazy sci-fi extreme, but the underlying concept is treated very seriously in the research we're looking at today.
Obviously, yeah.
Like, if you learn the language of physics, you aren't just memorizing physics trivia. You are physically altering how you perceive the material world. You look at a baseball being thrown and you see, arcs and velocity and gravity in a way someone else just doesn't.
What's fascinating here is that modern neuroscience completely validates that conceptual leap. I mean, we have this terrible habit of thinking about language purely as a utility.
Like a tool.
Right, like a telephone, just a dead wire we use to transmit a message from person A to person B. But neurologically, language is a high-order function.
It's doing way more than just talking.
Oh, absolutely. It actively encodes your identity, how you structure your memories, your cognition, and your social integration. It's a highly structured, dynamic system. One of the papers actually describes it as a living algorithm inside the brain.
A living algorithm. I am obsessed with that framing.
It's a great term.
But if I try to visualize that, how does it actually boot up? I mean, how do we acquire this algorithm in the first place?
Well, it begins on day one. From infancy, your brain is just an absolute sponge. It's wired almost entirely for pattern recognition.
So it's just looking for rules everywhere.
Exactly. So if you're born into a home where Spanish is spoken, or Bangla, or English, specific physical areas of your brain start to calibrate themselves to that environment.
What areas are we talking about?
The auditory cortex, Broca's area,
Yeah.
Wernicke's area, they are constantly listening, tuning into the phonemic structure, the rhythm, and especially the emotional cadence of your caretakers. And this calibration creates your default neural map.
So it's almost like pouring concrete into a specific mold. The brain is literally physically shaping its architecture around the sounds and rules of your living room.
That's a really great way to picture it, actually.
Yeah.
And this leads us to a really elegant concept from the sources, which is the neural handshake.
The neural handshake, I love that.
Yeah. When you are exposed to a second language or even a new academic subject that shares underlying similarities with your default map, your brain doesn't have to build a new mold from scratch.
Yeah. It just reuses what's there.
Exactly. It leverages the templates it already built.
I think I see where this is going. Because there's a real-world example in the material about a native speaker of Bangla. The research notes that they can often learn Hindi highly intuitively. Is that because of this handshake?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Bangla and Hindi share a really deep structural, phonological, and semantic proximity.
They're closely related.
Right. So the neural pathways that the brain needs to construct to understand Hindi can essentially shake hands with the existing, well-worn pathways built for Bangla.
That makes total sense.
The brain says, I recognize this rhythm, I recognize this sentence structure. It eases the acquisition process dramatically.
It's like if you already know how to ride a bicycle. Learning to ride a motorcycle is intimidating, sure, but your brain already inherently understands the physics of balance on two wheels.
Countersteering, momentum, yeah.
Right, you aren't starting from zero. But wait, I want to push back on this because I noticed a pretty glaring contradiction in the material.
What's that?
That same native Bangla speaker, who intuitively picks up Hindi, will often struggle immensely to learn English, even if they spend 12 years in formal schooling for it.
That is very common, yes.
So if the brain is this incredible, adaptable pattern recognition machine, why does it hit a brick wall with English?
Because that is where we run into the cognitive gap. English isn't just linguistically different from Bangla, it operates on a fundamentally different cognitive architecture.
What do you mean by cognitive architecture? I mean, aren't words just words?
Not at all. The way English encodes logic, causality, and abstraction is entirely distinct. For example, English relies heavily on a strict verb-object structure.
Okay, I remember that from grammar class.
Right, and it uses highly complex modal verbs to express possibility, and its meaning system is heavily tense-based. Processing all of those new rules activates entirely different neural circuits that are way outside the comfort zone of a brain trained on Bangla.
So there's no handshake happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is no existing template to latch onto. English extends a hand, and the Bangla-trained brain doesn't even recognize it as a hand.
Wow. So the structural differences alone make it an uphill battle. You're essentially building a whole new house instead of an extension.
Exactly.
But, reading through the psychology side of this research, there seems to be a much deeper, more emotional reason why people fail at learning new subjects. It's not just about sentence structure.
No, it's highly emotional.
It's about how we feel when we are forced to learn.
Yes, and this is perhaps the most crucial finding in the whole discussion, the neuropsychological block.
Yeah. The specific example given was about post-colonial societies, specifically Bangladesh. In that environment, English isn't just viewed as a practical way to order a coffee or send an email.
Far from it.
It is heavily tied to class, to historical power dynamics, to being viewed as elite. It carries this massive, invisible societal weight.
And that societal weight completely changes the neurochemical environment inside the learner's brain.
Literally changes the chemistry.
Yes. When a language, or frankly any complex subject like high-level math or corporate finance, is viewed as a status symbol or a test of your inherent worth, it triggers social anxiety pathways.
Oh, wow.
When you feel judged, your amygdala engages.
Wait, the amygdala is the threat detection center, right? The part that looks out for bears in the woods.
Exactly. And when the amygdala detects a threat, even a social one, it essentially hijacks metabolic resources away from your prefrontal cortex.
Which is bad for learning, I assume.
It is a massive problem.
Yeah.
Because the prefrontal cortex is the exact part of the brain you need for complex learning, working memory, and executive function.
Okay, hold on. My own prefrontal cortex is starting to overload trying to picture this. So you are saying that if I feel socially judged in a classroom, I am physically, biologically incapable of learning.
Pretty much, yeah.
Because my brain literally thinks my life is in danger.
That is precisely what is happening. In that state, the brain does not optimize for learning. It optimizes for defense.
That is wild.
Learners internalize any mistake, not as a simple data error, but as a deep personal inadequacy. This leads directly to avoidant behavior.
Right, you just want to escape.
You start analyzing the language defensively instead of experiencing it. You try to memorize grammar rules out of sheer terror of looking stupid rather than immersing yourself in the flow of communication.
Here's where it gets really interesting because the research ties this panic response directly into the concept of cognitive load.
Yes, cognitive load is key here.
When you are stressed out, your working memory shrinks. And to illustrate how bad that can be, they bring up the absolute linguistic puzzle that is the German language.
Oh, German is the perfect case study for cognitive overload. So, working memory is governed by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and it has a very strictly limited bandwidth.
It can only hold so much at once.
Exactly. Now, imagine a learner already stressed out trying to decode unfamiliar German sounds, remember grammatical gender rules, and figure out the meaning of a sentence all at once.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It gets worse. German frequently uses a grammatical rule called delayed verb resolution.
Let me see if I understand this. This is where the verb gets thrown all the way to the very end of the clause, right?
Yes. So, if you are listening to a native German speaker, Your brain is forced to hold all of this partial, incomplete information in its working memory.
Just waiting.
Right. You are maintaining the semantic integrity of the sentence, tracking the subjects and objects, waiting and waiting until the very end of the breath to finally get the action verb that retroactively makes the whole sentence make sense.
Man, it sounds exhausting. One of the papers compared this to languages that deliver meaning progressively, piece by piece, but German forces you to just hold your breath mentally.
It really does.
It's like, imagine someone is handing you heavy, unmarked boxes, one by one, and you have to hold all of them in your arms, balancing this awkward, heavy tower of boxes while the person just stares at you.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
And it's only at the very end of the interaction that they finally hand you the label that tells you what room to put them in. By that point, your arms have just given out.
Exactly. The heavy boxes are the nouns and adjectives, and the label is the delayed verb. Managing that tower of boxes demands intense working memory management, sustained attentional focus, and recursive logic.
And then you add the amygdala hijack to that scenario.
Right.
So someone is handing me heavy, unmarked boxes, my arms are shaking, and meanwhile, someone else is screaming at me that if I drop a box, it proves I have low social status and no future.
And that is the perfect visualization of the modern rote learning environment. It is an impossible task because the brain is panicking. The bandwidth is totally exceeded.
Okay, so if the modern method, rote memorization, decontextualized vocabulary lists, performance-based grading, if all that is a neurological mismatch that causes cognitive overload and amygdala hijacks, how did we ever survive?
What do you mean?
I mean, how did our brains actually evolve to learn language? Because obviously we figured it out long before standardized testing existed.
To understand that, we have to look back at our evolutionary blueprint. For early human beings, language wasn't about passing a written exam to get into a good college. It was a matter of survival.
Right.
If a hunter-gatherer failed to accurately decode the emotional tone, the urgency, or the body language of their tribe, they could easily endanger the entire group.
So the stakes were literally life and death, but it wasn't like academic stress. It was highly contextual, in-the-moment urgency.
Yes, language acquisition in our evolutionary past was incredibly fast. It was entirely driven by physical context, and most importantly, it was deeply emotional.
Emotional learning.
Yes. Early humans, and toddlers today actually, learn by decoding relevance. They use mirror neurons to internalize gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, and rhythm. They form these multisensory memory webs.
So emotion and survival drove the learning process, not rule-based logic.
Exactly.
There is a really striking example in the research that proves this point. They talk about a village child who is just casually exposed to English through emotionally engaging cartoons or pop music.
Oh yes, I love that example.
That kid, without ever opening a textbook, will very often completely outperform a top student who has been relentlessly formally drilled in English grammar for years.
Because neuroscience shows us that emotion is the primary driver of neuroplasticity.
And neuroplasticity is the brain's physical ability to rewire itself, right?
Right. When a learner is intrinsically motivated, say a teenager deciding to learn Japanese purely out of a deep personal passion for anime, rather than because it's a mandatory school credit, the brain stops defending itself.
The thread is gone.
Yes, the amygdala calms down and the brain starts adapting.
It actually changes its physical structure based on passion. That feels like magic.
It's not magic, it's biology. The research breaks down these microneurological adaptations beautifully. When you are emotionally immersed, several distinct brain regions coordinate simultaneously.
Okay.
First, the auditory cortex in the temporal lobe literally tunes itself to new phonetic ranges. Different languages have different frequency thresholds.
Okay, wait, hold on. My prefrontal cortex is maxing out again with the terminology. Let's break this down so we can really picture it. If my brain learning a new language is like a film production set, let's use that.
Some set, okay.
What is the auditory cortex doing on set?
I like that. Okay, the auditory cortex is your sound mixing board. It is actively adjusting its sliders to pick up new frequencies and rhythms that it previously ignored. You literally begin to hear differently.
Okay, sound mixer is locked in. What's next?
Then you have Wernicke's area. This is the scriptwriter.
The scriptwriter, nice.
It is hard at work reconstructing semantic associations. It's remapping your lexical memory so you intuitively understand the meaning of words across different contexts.
So Wernicke's is the writer figuring out the meaning of the scene. Who is actually directing the actors?
That would be Bracco's area, director. It adapts to generate the new syntax and physically plans the new articulations of your mouth and tongue. It yells action so you can form the words.
But when I watch someone who is truly fluent, they aren't like thinking about directing. They aren't pausing to plan their mouth movements. They just speak. Who handles that?
That is the basal ganglia. On your film set, that's the veteran camera crew.
Oh, I see.
They have so much muscle memory, they don't even have to look at the camera to pull focus. The basal ganglia reinforces repeated linguistic sequences so that speaking becomes procedural fluency. It becomes automatic, like walking.
And finally, making sure we don't forget the movie we just shot.
The hippocampus,
Yeah.
the film archive. It takes all this early, immersive exposure and converts it into long-term episodic memory.
Amazing.
But, and this is the absolute crucial caveat of the entire discussion, the hippocampus does this most effectively when the experience is emotionally charged.
That brings it all together beautifully because if I'm just staring at a sterile whiteboard, parsing out verb conjugations, I'm just reading the script. I don't have a sound mixer. I don't have a director. I don't have an experienced crew. I'm bypassing almost all of that evolutionary machinery.
Exactly. Without emotional engagement, without a sense of social urgency, playfulness, or true immersion, those incredible brain structures remained totally underutilized.
Yeah.
Grammar drills alone simply cannot activate that deep rewiring process. You cannot force neuroplasticity with a flashcard.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the whole picture, the central takeaway seems to be that true understanding, whether you are trying to learn quantum physics, how to code in Python, or how to speak conversational German, it requires letting go of this rigid defensive sense of self.
Yes.
It's not about forcing facts into your brain with a hammer. It's about allowing yourself to adapt to the new language of that subject.
And that perspective shift is incredibly empowering, particularly for people who have traditionally struggled or been made to feel inadequate in standard educational settings.
Yes, I was so glad the research explicitly mentioned neurodivergence. People with ADHD, dyslexia, or folks on the autism spectrum, they often get labeled as struggling students.
Sadly, yes.
But this research shows they can actually thrive when we stop forcing them to learn via rote memorization. When they are allowed to bypass traditional rigid learning and find their own unique way to connect with the knowledge.
To map it to their own hyperfixations and passions.
Right. Their brains are entirely capable of massive fluency. They just needed a different on-ramp.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what this science is really advocating for is a massive systemic shift in how we approach learning anything. We have to move away from performance anxiety and move toward cognitive empathy.
Cognitive empathy. I love that.
We have to transition from a grammar-first approach to a context-first approach. Learning a new subject shouldn't feel like carrying heavy, unmarked boxes up a mountain while someone yells at you. It should be a natural neurobiological unfolding.
A neurobiological unfolding. I think that is the perfect way to frame it. The brain wants to learn, we just keep getting in its way. You know, to you, the person listening to this right now, think back to a subject you struggled with in school. Maybe you thought you just weren't a math person, or that you were fundamentally terrible at history, or that coding was just for geniuses.
Right.
But if every complex subject is essentially a language, and emotion is the ultimate key to unlocking the brain's language centers, what difficult subject in your past did you fail at simply because you were forced to memorize its grammar instead of being invited to experience its culture? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.